new kind of Pontiac. A driver's coupe that's simply not for everyone. Pontiac. Grand Am. Handle with flair. You got it, Pontiac.
Tell you about the chicken in a minute, but first of all, I want to mention the big produce sale at Woodward's. 20 different items, every one of them on sale. Cabbage, by the way, if you're into the corned beef and cabbage for St. Patrick's Day, cabbage is a Best Buy this weekend. Speaking of Best Buys, take a look at the grade A frozen chicken. Now, these are 87 cents a pound, an outstanding Best Buy. Limit 3 to a family order.
Woodward's has it all. SATV, we're coming through for you.
Good morning. Finance Minister Hugh Curtis yesterday in Victoria presented his recovery budget with a program detailed and complex of about $1 billion in tax cuts, tax breaks, and incentive for business to create jobs, we all hope. But will it work? I'm going to be interviewing the Finance Minister from our studio in Victoria this morning. Later I'll be talking to Dave Stupich, the NDP financial critic, and for opposing views probably on the effect of the budget, I have Jim Matkin of the Business Council of British Columbia, Jack Munro of the IWA, and Roman Evancic, former past president of the CGA and a very detailed budget observer. But first to Mr. Curtis in Victoria after the break. Good morning, Mr. Curtis.
Good morning, sir. How are you, Jack?
First, a totally unfair question from a negative point of view, and then I'll try to be positive. How many jobs will your budget create in this first year of incentives, which gives about $136 million in tax breaks to business in BC?
Jack, I don't have a number to offer to you this morning, but we've already had inquiries which suggest that there is great interest in what we've done in the budget. And I'd like to answer the question a little later this spring.
In other words, give it 6 or 8 months.
Oh, I don't know that in some respects, I don't think it will require 6 or 8 months on the basis of one call from Calgary today. Quote, if what we hear about the budget is correct, then it means a lot of activity in British Columbia very quickly.
It's obvious, Mr. Curtis, that you took to heart the detailed and worried complaints of businessmen about the insensitive, non-profit making taxes which you have slashed quite severely. Would you care to give me the actual cuts you've made, starting first of all with the machinery and equipment tax cuts, which is an old social credit institution?
Well, could I give you a little bit of background, hopefully to answer that question? The tax study tour which I took last fall, which I indicated a year ago would be undertaken, took us to every part of British Columbia, from Cranbrook to Smithers to Fort Nelson to Parksville. We went to 28 communities. We held open public meetings. There was not one single closed meeting. We heard from individuals with carefully prepared briefs. We heard from individuals with just a few comments on a piece of paper. And I learned a great deal about the mood of British Columbia in the course of that tour. We received over 400 briefs, which is a significant number, I think, by any measurement. And I started hearing themes. They were not lobbies, but individual opinions repeated time and time again from community to community.
But the steps you have taken are in many ways major steps to reverse social credit tax policies on machinery and equipment because they were too heavy because we have no market demand. Correct, sir?
That's correct, but I think that the machinery and equipment is one aspect. The fact is that we were told repeatedly, and indeed not just in the context of the tour, that fixed taxes, whether a business is doing well or not is beside the point. There are fixed taxes. The cost of employing individuals, the cost of paying taxes on debt, as an example, corporation capital, and machinery and equipment is one. Fixed taxes, they said, are really hurting us very, very severely in British Columbia. We don't mind paying taxes on that which we earn, but if the taxes stay at this level, whether we are profitable or not, that is not fair, and that is self-defeating.
And that's why you removed the machinery and equipment tax progressively over 3 years.
That's correct.
How much will you lose on that?
We're going to lose a significant amount of money on that, but frankly, I think that the other side of it, in terms of the confidence that it will establish in business and industry, will offset that ultimately. But in the short term, it is a loss.
And then you took another sharp tax in removing school taxes from industrial and commercial property.
Yeah, the so-called non-residential property tax, and that includes school. The bulk of it, in fact, is school tax. We've taken a major step there. I recognize that. I was asked earlier on radio if that meant that municipalities were going to have to increase their taxes. That question is based on an incorrect assumption, not that you have made it.
No, because you've promised to give $88 million to the school districts to replace the money they will lose on that other school tax from business and industry.
What we have foregone in this budget in terms of non-residential property tax is provincial money, provincial tax money.
And you're going to replace that from general revenue?
Yes, we have to.
Now, the corporation capital tax, that was put in some years ago by social credit, and you're progressive...
No, excuse me. The corporation capital tax was not, it was introduced by the NDP.
Kept by social credit.
And kept by social credit until yesterday.
And you're going to lose $96 million over 3 years, except for the revenue from the headquarters of the 5 major banks. Have they phoned you and told you what a scoundrel you are?
No, they have not phoned. Some representatives of major banks were at the budget yesterday, and they expressed, how should I put it, concern. But frankly, I think that is a fair element of corporation capital tax. For so long as I've been Minister of Finance, indeed for so long as I've been in government, I've heard the comments that the corporation capital tax is unfair. In instances, many instances, it is a tax on debt. And it is not so much the amount of money which is paid, but the inherent obvious unfairness of it, and therefore I'm delighted to see it on its way out.
Many people are disappointed, even though you've frozen your water rates tax, the additional tax over the dams into your coffers, and you have not offered any cheap power or interruptible power rates to the mining industry or the forestry industry, which are in such great distress.
Well, in one afternoon and in 2 hours, and I'm surprised that I have a voice this morning, Jack, it is not possible to spell out every single detail. I would say, in your vernacular, stay tuned.
In other words, the Commissioner of...
Stay tuned with respect to electricity and the Commissioner of Critical Industries.
Because the Commissioner of Critical Industries, will he have legislation enabling him to do things or just to make kind of informal deals through municipalities?
No, it's broader than the last, but I really don't want to comment further. The bill is not in the House. The bill will be in the House very soon. And I think that a number of your questions will be answered. I could come back then if you wish and describe that process.
Because if one were to be deliberately querulous, it would seem that apart from the lessening of the tax burden, there has been no major thrust to help either mining or forestry in the budget.
No, I don't agree. And frankly, the spokesman for the mining industry yesterday and again today, I believe, seems to be at odds or variance with heads of a number of mining companies. I'm sure there will be some interesting conversations taking place this morning between the office of the president of the association and individual participants or members in the association.
In other words, Enemark is going to get his comeuppance from some people who don't disagree. Oh, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have mentioned names.
It's not for me to say, but I've had comments thus far which indicate that the mining industry understands the significance of the measures which were taken.
There are a couple of major items in your very detailed budget speech, Mr. Curtis, which depend entirely on completing the deals with the federal government. Is that correct?
Well, yes, they are.
The $650 million joint plan with the federals over 5 years.
You're speaking of IRDA?
IRDA.
IRDA, the umbrella, yes.
And you're confident that the feds will kick in their $325 million soon?
Yes, I think that First of all, we had to indicate that our money was in place, and indeed the first year's money of the 5-year program is there. It is committed, and now we can continue our negotiations with Ottawa with respect to the federal share.
Would it be correct to say, therefore, that your $30 million towards forestry and silviculture is committed, and that when you get the other 30, there'll be a $60 million program for the forest industry?
Now you're speaking of 1 year.
1 year.
1 year, correct, yes.
Is that enough?
Well, I think it's, I certainly understand from the Minister of Forests, who was not privy to everything in the budget, I understand that he's quite satisfied.
More with Hugh
Of course
Curtis.
he'd like more, but he's satisfied.
More with Hugh Curtis, the Minister of Finance, after the break. Mr. Curtis, to continue with your aids to business and industry, you've got some fuel tax cuts of about $55 million, eh?
Yes, under what is known usually as off-road. That's a variety of uses not associated with driving a vehicle on the highways.
The employee tax credit is not quite as generous as it would seem, is it, Mr. Curtis? It's not really $300 for every employee of every company in the province, is it? A tax credit refundable from provincial share of income tax.
Well, I think it is quite generous. It has not yet been described, insofar as I've been able to hear or read, as what it is really, and that is a small business corporation tax holiday. We looked at a number of models, and you will know that tax holidays of that nature have been introduced elsewhere from time to time. It is in place for 2 years. It is going to be of great significance, I think, to, quote, small business. And the formula is described in the budget. I won't attempt to describe it on your program today.
But it doesn't mean, surely, that if I have 10 employees, non-related, that I automatically, regardless of the salaries of the formula, get a $3,000 check back from the government.
No, you will get $300 per employee against the corporation tax that you would, or the corporate tax that you would normally pay provincially, and it's quite significant, Jack. I think that, again, it's one which has to be looked at very carefully in terms of how it is going to be managed.
Right now. Now to the bad news. Well, bad news for some people. Absolutely flat, no wage increases for anyone in the fiscal future, for employees of the government or the crown corporations. No, nothing.
With respect to the coming year, that's correct.
And does that mean that the CSP regulations will be changed to bring it down to zero increase in any negotiations?
Well, I think that we still have the very key element of productivity to take into account with regard to CSP, and I'll be speaking about that again in the next days.
There might still be a productivity aspect to that. Now, the bad news, of course, is that you're saving you're reducing taxes by $136 million, and the income tax, the ordinary guy is going to get hammered on the health surtax, which doubles.
Well, yes, but let's put that in context. It's not in this year's budget. It was introduced last year. We had a half-year effect of it in 1984. We now have the full-year effect. I haven't changed it in this budget with respect to that which was in place in 1984.
I just say we only paid half of it last year, and this year you knew we were going to pay the full one, and that'll bring you in an extra $70 million from the personal income taxpayers of the province to help make up for the business concessions.
When you say that I knew, I hope you're not suggesting that I was not upfront about it, because I indicated last year that it would be, in effect, the full year effect we discussed 1 year ago, approximately.
In other words, it will bring in $70 million extra to help offset the aid to business and industry.
No, I'm afraid you're mixing apples and oranges, Jack.
Oh.
It was put in place last year. It is related directly to the cost of health care in British Columbia, the largest single area of expenditure in this government, one which is growing quite rapidly, and which obviously will continue to grow quite rapidly.
Oh, no.
So you can't, please don't take a measure that was introduced last year with respect to health and equate it to assistance to business this year, because the two are not related.
Let me not do that. If I paid $110 health care maintenance surtax last year for half of my tax for my tax for half of the year.
From July onward.
From
yes.
July this year, I'll pay 220.
That's correct.
That's right. So
Yes.
it doubles.
Yes, and that was indicated very clearly at the time the surtax was introduced 1 year ago.
Bit chintzy on taxing pay TV, Mr. Curtis, for a miserable 1.5 million. I mean, I'm not complaining about the cigarette tax. You must tax these foul smokers, but
Of which I am one.
and I am another. But 1.5 million on pay TV, that's a real luxury for people, and you're hitting them hard.
Well, Jack, I want to take a few moments to answer that because one of the suggestions that we discussed at the conclusion of the tax study was putting sales tax, frankly, on all Cablevision service. I immediately decided no, there was absolutely no way I would do that because basic Cablevision is a very important part of an individual's life. Pay TV is an option, and one does not have to have it. You describe it as chintzy, but let's look at some of the foregone revenue that I've undertaken, some small items, which one of which created a bit of a chuckle in the legislature yesterday, and what we've foregone in certain areas might be $100,000. The removal of the business license fees in non-municipal areas. That was a delight to examine carefully. When I started to ask officials, does anyone in government need the information that is obtained through the imposition of a business license, quite apart from the fee? Now, the answer was no. Mm-hmm. And therefore, I think we're trying to reform the tax system, we're trying to simplify it, and we're also trying to get regulations which are of no great use, but have been there traditionally for decades, get rid of them too, and I'll continue to do that.
You have some, not minor, noticeable cuts to job training, help for retarded, health and dental for people on welfare, senior supplements and children's aid, totaling about $14 million, right?
You describe them as cuts?
It says, in the way I look at the estimates, it looks like cuts.
Well, you'll hear from individual ministers responsible for human resources or health precisely how that's fleshed out. The total budgets are up, and I think that's the key point.
Now, on the aid to universities and colleges, you're giving them much the same, except you are keeping $26 million within your control, perhaps to direct the university, to pay off surplus faculty, and reshape some of the courses in universities and colleges. Am I correct?
Well, the money is separately marked. That is correct.
It's in your control.
Well, it's not in my control.
In McGear's control,
it would
the government's
be in the control of the Minister of Education and the Minister of Universities. And I think that you will want to talk to them about that. Certainly, it is nothing that I have done nor heard suggests that it is for government programs or government activities, government-directed courses, but rather to assist universities in changing for the 1980s, 1990s.
Just in closing, would it be fair to say to you that your budget is based on hoping and praying that because of these reductions you've necessarily given to encourage business, you must get in a market recovery somewhere or you'll be in more trouble, bigger trouble next year? Is that fair to say?
I am not, in this context, hoping and praying, Jack. I heard the concerns. I heard people say, if you weren't doing this, I could do that. If you were away from me, if you were off my back, I could hire more people, I could expand my plant, I could renew, I could open a branch, whatever it might be, and I have responded to that. Therefore, I take people at their face value when they told me these concerns, and I believe they're going to take me at face value, having responded to them. I think that it is a good partnership. I think it is a budget that will prove its worth, perhaps not tomorrow, but certainly in the weeks and months and years to come.
One little question. Where you have the tax incentives for new business in municipalities, which seems to make sense, does this mean, though, that municipalities will be competing with each other in giveaway to attract any business that wants to establish? Will they have to compete with each other and say, I'll give you land for free, I'll give you this for free, come to me, I'll guarantee that you can employ people at the minimum wage?
Well, Bill Ritchie will be describing that in detail for representatives of the Union of BC Municipalities, local government, at 10 o'clock this morning. There will be some element of competition, but not as harsh as you have suggested.
One little question, totally unrelated to the budget.
The last one was one little question.
Well, this is just a tiny one. Remember you took that $470 million last year and paid off and put it into the sinking funds of the BCR debt?
Yes?
Did you borrow that back for the government?
It came back in one respect, but essentially it paid off their debt. It came back only for accounting purposes.
Oh, in other words, they put in the sinking funds, then borrowed the
Yep.
sinking funds.
That's right.
So technically the historic debt is paid off.
It's gone. It's gone as of the 31st of March.
My thanks to Hugh Curtis. Hugh, non-partisan manner, the best of luck to all of us.
I agree. Thank
Next to Dave Stupich, NDP finance critic after the break. Dave Stupich is a former finance minister of British Columbia and, of course, is the NDP finance critic. I'm just going to leave it wide open to you, Dave, to tackle it any way you like and how bad or how good it looks to you and your colleagues in the opposition.
Well, Jack, it looks to us as though the government is recognizing that the so-called restraint program of the last 3 years has been bad medicine for British Columbia. It's not the remedy that we needed at all. So now they're starting to strike out in another direction. But they haven't really decided what direction to go yet. So they've thrown in a lot of stuff that is going to apply to a little bit to this year and then more to the second year and even more to the third year in the hope that sometime within the next 3 years they'll come up with a plan to try to get BC moving again.
There is no doubt that he's making $136 million in incentive cuts and tax breaks, however, to business and industry, is there?
In 1 year out of a $9 billion budget. And I question the value of those cuts, Jack. One of them is a $300 employment tax credit. Now, I don't know any employer who's going to go out and hire an employee at a cost of $10,000 plus simply because they're going to get $300 back from the government.
But doesn't it apply to employees presently on your payroll under a somewhat complicated formula?
Oh, yes, of course it does. That's all there. But what we were hoping for was that this budget was going to provide more jobs, more economic opportunities, and that's what's missing in the budget from what I see. There are tax relief programs for business and industry, but little that will really provide jobs, certainly in the first year and maybe not in the second or
Did you
third.
anticipate, or would you, had you been in charge of the government, have engineered some massive injection into primary industries?
Jack, I think we need it. I think above all else we need some confidence in BC that there is some hope that things are going to improve. For 3 years now we've been sliding back further and further behind the rest of Canada, the rest of the Canadian provinces. We needed something to show that the government recognized that they need a change in direction. We're not getting it in this budget at all.
But what can you do when your resource revenues have dropped from $1.3 billion in 1 year to $580 million a couple of years later?
That's a problem, Jack, but 42% of the employment in Canada, and the figures can't be much different from BC, 42% of the employment is created by small business. Now, I welcome the thrust to try to help small business, but what I'm saying is that small business needs customers more than it needs gimmicks to persuade them that they should be doing more. They're not going to expand their businesses unless they know that there's a market out there. And while the amount paid to people on human resource payments, for example, the amount's fixed, and yet the government expects the total amount spent to go up in this year, that's recognition of itself, that they know there'll be more people on welfare in the year ahead. It's a recognition of failure.
Well, it's obvious that nothing massive has been done for the mining industry. I'm not so sure about the forestry industry, but surely when you remove that much-hated machinery tax from pulp mills and whatnot, that's got to be a big help to our major industry.
It's going to help them, but Jack, is it going to provide job opportunities?
No,
That's what we're supposed to be talking about. Now, sure, they're going to give the industry more money, but there are no strings on it. They don't have to do anything. They don't have to earn it in any way. We're simply going to give them the money and say, here, go ahead, do whatever you want with it. You're not obliged to try to provide more job opportunities. This is simply a gift from the very good people of British Columbia. We want to make you feel happier about being here, so we're going to give you some money.
Do you agree with the firm statement in the budget that there's no money for pay increases except those already negotiated for all provincial and Crown Corporation employees? Is that not a good, sane, clear signal on ability to pay of the taxpayer?
Well, Jack, the taxpayer has the ability to pay, and there are some people that need pay adjustments. This is no way to bargain. The government talks about maintaining collective bargaining. That's in the budget speech. They have not maintained collective bargaining when they come out in the budget speech and say, go ahead and bargain all you want, but there's no money to pay any kind of an increase at any level. Even the people in the lowest of levels, some of those do need some adjustment after the years with wage freezes.
Mr. Curtis quibbled a little bit about my interpretation of the doubling of the Healthcare Maintenance Surtax Act, but that is what is happening this year, is it not? Will that not be the money that helps to make up the $136 million in large measure?
Well,
Eh?
it could be. I just don't know what they're going to do about that. I think they're still arguing with Ottawa about that whole business of user fees for health services. I think we haven't seen the end of that story.
Now, what about the ERDA agreement? $650 million over 5 years.
Jack, it's fantastic. After all this talk about ERDA agreements, and almost every other Canadian province has signed agreements with Ottawa, our friends in Ottawa, the new government, BC has yet to sign the first agreement. $650 million over 5 years, but they admit in that same paragraph that they have not yet signed the first agreement. Even if they do, that's talking about $130 million a year. Now, we wanted more than that for the forests alone.
Yeah. Well, it's a bad budget, a poor budget, a budget of desperation, or just all he could do?
Well, it's all he could do within the parameters of that he was given, I suppose. But it's certainly not going to do the job of getting BC going again. I think it's a budget that they're going to use a year from now when they're going to go to the people and say, look, we told you a year ago that in the second year we were going to do thus and so to get things moving, to put money into the economy. Well, here we are at that point in time, and without us bringing in a budget to show you precisely what we'll do, we'd like you to re-elect us on the basis of the promises that we made 1 year ago in a budget speech that didn't offer anything for the people.
As a man who would prime the pump, though, perhaps from your philosophy, you wouldn't be the least bit concerned about the fact that we now have nearly $17 billion in debt, up from $4 billion in 1975.
Jack, I am concerned that the provincial debt has almost quadrupled during the 9 years that Bill Bennett has been in charge of the government of British Columbia. The debt right now is costing the people of British Columbia $5 million a day in interest alone. That does concern me. What concerns me even more is what do we have to show for it? Northeast Coal subsidizing the export of coal to Japan when we were getting all the coal we needed from the southeast. BC Place, a gift, $250 million. Good or bad, nevertheless, we'll be paying for that for the rest of our lives and for our children's lives. It'll go on and on and on. The light rapid transit, where the city of Vancouver wanted a much more economical type of transportation, one that was proven, and yet we elected for one that's costing 4 times as much as the one that the city of Vancouver wanted. I can talk about grandiose scheme after grandiose scheme that they have adopted as monuments to social credit. None of them will ever pay for themselves in the foreseeable future, if ever, and they've piled up this massive debt. $5 million a day in interest alone is what we're paying right now.
So you say until the election next year, another year of misery under social credit?
Certainly nothing more than that, unless the movers and shakers in the community look at this and say, well, maybe it will be better next year, so maybe we'll start getting ready and start investing now. I can't think that they really will be taken in by it, but that's the only hope, and that's a pretty small hope.
My thanks to Dave Stupich, finance critic for the New Democratic Party. Next, Jim Matkin of the Business Council of British Columbia. Thanks, David. After the break. The question is business in British Columbia rubbing its hands with glee and gloating a little this morning that Bennett and Curtis listened to them? Here is Jim Matkin, President of the Business Council of British Columbia. Is this not precisely what you wanted and which your government of your choice has given you?
The budget addressed some important issues that the business community asked Mr. Curtis to look at. I think one of the important questions is, why did the business community need those changes?
Because we have a depression, a recession, we're in trouble, we got no markets, nobody's making money, businesses are going broke.
Yeah, that's the economic context, but I think a very important point to make is that we are a small world. We compete in the international trade business. How our competitors are treated is very important to how successful we're going to be. The taxation system in British Columbia had got out of line with taxes in other jurisdictions.
That was prosperity had gone to our government's heads.
Partly, it was partly a question of philosophy. these insensitive taxes like the property tax on machinery and equipment were making it uncompetitive for our industries, for pulp and for mining, to compete with jurisdictions that didn't have this kind of tax system.
Good for him then.
That's a good point. He listened to that, but he listened to in effect, really, to the fact that our competitors in other jurisdictions have this kind of tax regime.
And the same goes for the corporal capital tax cut.
Well, actually not. That's a bit of a move out on our own. Perhaps that's an attempt to create a financial center here by encouraging head offices to come here. Certainly the reduction is appreciated by business. That is not a good tax. It'd be nice if it was reduced entirely for all businesses, including banks.
Well, apart from the school tax reductions, which are considerable, and the machinery and property tax reductions, which are considerable, and the corporal capital tax cut, which over 3 years will be considerable, has he done anything else of significance? He's done nothing actually to inject life into any troubled industries like mining particularly, has he?
Well, no, he has not. He can't change the markets or the prices of our products in the world trade. But he has, one of the significant things he did besides that was to reduce the fuel tax. That's a significant reduction. Now that's an interesting one because while the predictions are that it may cost $55 million, that's a reduction from 20% down to 7%. There's another point of view that in fact they may make money on that reduction, that the situation had become so negative for the airplane industry or the aviation industry that they were actually missing revenue by having taxes that were too high.
You didn't have to pay them elsewhere, but you had to pay them in BC, so you filled up elsewhere, you didn't fill up here.
That's it. So here's a situation where you can reduce taxes and increase revenues. And I think that's part of the basic philosophy of this budget that is supported by the business community.
Roman Evancic is going to give me the detail of the employee tax credit complications, but it doesn't seem terribly exciting, does it? This $300 tax credit per employee.
Well, it addresses, again, just the fixed costs, perhaps, UI and CPP.
How about the venture the venture capital tax investment credit? Is that any good to anybody?
Well, that addresses, again, the need to increase our support for small business.
So that's cosmetic, with perhaps some encouragement for a minority number of people who are going to start new venture capital businesses.
Well, the experience in other jurisdictions, again, this is not a new tax. We didn't invent it. It was been introduced in other provinces and other states. It's been successful. It's been useful.
Now, what about it's the working man is going to pay $70 million anyway of the cuts to business because of the full rate of health care surtax maintenance tax this year, right?
Well, I think that's moving in the direction of more user pay for the services that we get.
Now, let's turn to universities. You, apart from being the president of the Business Council, I'm sure you're interested in our universities. Do you see what he's done there? He's allocated $14 million separately for universities, $12 million separately for colleges, and said, I'm keeping these up my sleeve, and you'll get them for severance pay and for certain programs of initiative and drive. Is that not dangerous?
Well, I think the idea of adding some incentive to university is okay. The question is, how is that going to be administered? I have some concern if it's going to be administered directly from the minister's office, particularly for the universities. I think the tradition of the universities is such that they should have control of the academic programming of the universities. So the University Council could be the mechanism for administering that without creating the danger that I think you're...
Because that was one of the reasons George Peterson said in this program he was concerned about interference in the direction in which to go. But at the same time, why should we have 3 teachers' schools in British Columbia? Why should we have 2 law schools in British Columbia? Maybe you've got to have an outsider to say, pull up your socks.
Well, I think you should have some ability to coordinate the 3 universities. But whether it's an outsider, that is somebody completely outside the system, or whether this is done as it's done in California, that there is an allocation within the university community. And the vehicle for that might be the Universities Council. But you're dead on that there is a need to allocate the resource efficiently. We can't afford to do otherwise.
Looking broadly at the budget then, it's not a jobs budget, it's a salvage budget to encourage existing industry and perhaps some incentives for new industry with special tax breaks in municipalities.
But the survival of existing industry is a jobs question. We're in tough shape. You've got my friend Jack Munro here, and he's going to be able to tell you that we're not out of the woods yet. And this budget is addressing some of the difficult needs that we've got in the industry.
And for that, you compliment Curtis and the government.
Well, it is a fact that we asked for some changes. The government listened. Consultation worked.
They didn't listen on the cheaper power rates for industries in trouble yet.
No, and they didn't reduce the water tax as much as the mining industry would like. But they moved in the right direction, and they gave certainty to mining and forestry by giving a 5-year freeze.
And it does seem that there might be something coming up with power for the Commission of Critical Industries.
That could be the area that we hear about.
Don't go away, Jim Matkin. Next, Jack Munro of the IWA after the break. So there's one man who knows about the dire straits of the lumber industry in British Columbia. It's Jack Munro, the regional president. Let's start depressing. How many people have you still not got working in this province, Mr. Munro?
Between 18 and 20,000.
What does this budget do for you and your members in the way of any extra jobs in the woods or the lumber industry?
Well, Jack, it does absolutely nothing. And this nonsense that's coming off of your program this morning, not by you, but by your guests, drives me up the wall. This BS about reduction in taxes, and I can't believe Ray Smith in this morning's paper saying the government was listening. Ray Smith, when he was before that tax commission, said Powell River, the water tax is $40 a ton in pulp. The equivalent tax in Ontario, Quebec, our competitors for producing pulp, is $3 a ton. And the government froze it. They haven't removed it, they froze it.
The water
$40
tax.
a ton, right. How the hell are we going to get investment to come when those things are still here? This budget, Jack, creates absolutely no work. There is no incentive. The money is there from this machinery. The companies can do whatever the hell they want, pay off their loans in New York or Montreal or their shareholders or anything else. Doesn't mean they're going to have to employ or create any jobs. The money that they are getting back is coming off of the sick and the old and the young and the people who need health care. And I can't believe Jim Matkin, sitting here, he's still plugged into the Premier's office. Nobody changed his tape. It's the same stories.
You're making the point, and I want to stress it for you, that even though there are machinery and property tax reductions on Powell River and pulp mills and lumber mills and industrial plants, all that does is help them pay off their bank debt or go to the shareholders, and nothing goes in necessarily. But it may stop some of them from going bankrupt.
It won't, Jack. It won't. What was the companies doing pleading with this Curtis's traveling roadshow on tax reform when he's ignored that? He talks about Tex Enemark made a statement yesterday. I don't know if he's going to get balled out by the mining industry or not, but what Tex Enemark, and I don't have a hell of a lot of sympathy for most of his views, but he was right. It does nothing for the mining industry. It does absolutely nothing for the forest industry, Jack. They can't even agree when there is money available from Ottawa to plant some trees in this province. This government hasn't got the ability to negotiate money that's sitting there. We want money to build trees. We had suggestions. It isn't good enough to sit here and say there's nothing we can do because of world markets. There is some things we can do.
Maybe they've kind of written out the lumber industry a bit. They are going to get, and I'm sure they're going to sign the agreement with Ottawa. Let's be fair. They're going to get $30 million of their own money, which they say is up front now, for silviculture and forestry, and $30 million from the feds. Now, is that $60 million not a big help for reforestation and silviculture in British Columbia?
Nothing.
It's what?
It's nothing. What Curtis swiped $85 million off of us and off of the trees and off of the people of this province in '82 out of the reforestation fund. He still hasn't put that money back. What they do is they come out of the budget and they say there's going to be $200 and some million in this. Then they underspend it. Then the next year they come out and say they're going to spend, this is an increase of 2%, I think, over what they spent last year. Not what they said last year, but what they actually spent last year. And this is the way they
So you say they've been robbing the forestry estimates. They haven't even given you back that $85 million.
Right.
Won't that $60 million, will that go to IWA people, or where will it go?
No, it won't. I don't know what to tell them.
Go to tree planters.
I don't know.
If there is any tree planting. You can't look at the camera and say there are jobs for your men out of this budget.
There are no jobs for our men out of this budget. There are no jobs for any citizen in British Columbia out of this budget. There is nothing for the poor, the deprived, the people on welfare, the unemployed. There is absolutely no
Well,
hope.
let me put the Curtis point of view. He's got no money, he says. He's got
I
nothing.
think Curtis is an intellectual midget.
But that, to me, that's very fancy hyperbole.
They don't give a damn about working people. They don't care about citizens of British Columbia. I think Pat McGeer has got to these guys where he's talking about the forest industry being somewhat of a twilight industry. It is nonsense. The forest industry has and will continue to produce the real revenues for the people of this province. And McGeer and his nonsensical high tech, I think he slipped over the line of being a genius and a bloody lunatic. And when he fell over the line, his head went into a high-tech machine, and his screen that comes out says high-tech, high-tech, and he's psyching people up to believe that nonsense.
Jack Munro, you are incorrigible. I-N-C-O-R-R-I-G-I-B-L-E, incorrigible.
That's not the way we spell it.
At the BC Federation, at the IWA. Anyway, I gather you don't like the budget.
The budget is a disaster, Jack. Yeah. In all seriousness, this budget for this province is a bloody disaster. Industry. If industry cared about their employees, they would be in Victoria hammering on some doors over there this morning.
Well, I started to make the point, though. The guy's revenue went from natural resources from $1.3 billion, I think it was 1980, to $580 million in 1982. They lost $700 million in revenue.
How many bloody years do we have to say we got to spend some money and plant some trees? There is thousands and thousands and thousands acres per year in British Columbia that is not reforested. There are things we can do. We are letting, here's an example. If 100% recovery, and you can't get it because there's some sawdust in a log, if 100% recovery out of a log, Jack, was 12, you had Herschel Smith on. His mills get 9/12 recovery out of 100%. In other words, 75% of that wood is a board in Herschel.
Right.
His mills are down the tube because nobody would, pardon me,
Nobody would come to the financial rescue of it when they owned the banks $30, $40, $50 million.
Yeah, he needed $7.5 million, Jack. The rest was, sure, rest was
He's
compounded
gone
interest. There's all kinds of mills in this province, Jack. Not recovering 9/12s, recovering 5 and 5.5 and 6/12s out of a log. In other words, more than half of that log is going away in sawdust. If we were in a slow period of time if this government had any insight or pay attention to anybody other than themselves, if we measured every mill in this province to their recovery factor and said, now, a fair measurement, then it would take a year or something. Now this mill, if your mill is producing at 5.5/12s, in a year, we'll lend you enough money, low interest rates, a year, but your recovery factor has to come up to 7.
9/12, so
well,
7.
say 7 even, Jack. 10 or 15% increase.
How much would that increase the lumber output of the province of British Columbia?
Jack, a 10% increase in all of these mills would mean that we could get 1.5 billion more board feet out of the trees that we cut now, or the converse of that is we could have we would have to cut 1.5 billion less trees, board feet trees, to produce the same amount of lumber. That's happening right now.
Where is your friend Ray Smith and Sophie and all of this initiative?
I don't know. This industry, Jack, I've said before, they are so bloody backward and so slow. But this is good. This hasn't been talked about a lot. And we could do it, Jack. We could do it. It would take the pressure off of reforestation. It would modernize the mills. There would be less jobs, but at least our people would be working there with some
In case you hadn't noticed it, Jack Munro doesn't like Hugh Curtis' budget. Next, I'm going to have a session with Roman Evancic on some detail. Then I'm going to bring back Munro, Matkin, and Evancic, and you can have at them. Take a break. Well, Jack Munro's a hard act to follow for Roman Evancic, past president of CGA, and a man who's done some considerable study on the detail of the budgets which might just fascinate some interested businessmen. What do you want to tackle first? You want to explain to me, because Curtis got away from me on it, and I left it to you, to explain to me this $300 employee tax credit, which apparently is a tax refund direct from the government to the businessman.
Sure.
Is it good? Well, first of all, what do you think of the budget?
Well, if I were to score this budget, I'd give the budget a 10 and job 0.
Absolutely 0.
Yep.
But it is a salvage operation for some companies. It's a help.
Yes.
I mean, I want to be fair to Curtis.
Particularly the taxation of large industry, yes.
Large industry. Okay. Now, I want you to spell out this employee tax credit, if you can, without too much detail.
Okay, well, the Small Business Employment Tax Credit is a 2-year program. It will apply to incorporated businesses only. It does not recognize unincorporated small businesses, such as
partnerships.
Partnerships and proprietorships, which are probably about 50% of the small business of British Columbia, so they've been excluded. It will only apply to specified employees. It will not include principal shareholders or their direct relatives. So a small business, let's say with 8 employees and the husband and wife working, let's call this a restaurant, they're excluded. If one of their families working, they're excluded. So that gets us down to 5, okay? And if those employees earned an average of $12,000 apiece, that'd be $60,000. You divide 60,000 by 20, you'd get 3 times. You'd get $900.
Oh, it's not for each and every employee. No. It's on a wage formula.
Yes.
So out of that particular operation, you'd only get $900 tax credit.
Right, and you would get that sometime probably in about July 1986.
But it is a direct cash recovery, whether or not you're making or losing money.
Positively.
Right. Now, what about this other one? He made quite a big thing in the budget about the venture investment tax credit. Is that what you call it?
Yes, that's the Small Business Venture Capital Corporation.
Why are you smiling?
Well, I'm smiling. I was thinking of Mr. Matkin's remark that he said this was very successful in other jurisdictions. However, the formula for this one is not the same as the other jurisdictions, so I don't think it's going to work as successfully in British Columbia.
Right. How, if you can tell me, does it not work? How does it work?
Well, the way it's supposed to work is you would first form a business corporation in British Columbia. You would then get it registered as a venture capital corporation, and then the rules start. And the rules are that if a person were to invest, and let's use a retired person who happened to have $200,000 handy, so he'd have no taxable income, he'd invest $200,000 in this corporation, he would get a $60,000 check from the government when he filed his income tax. So that's the good part for that person. But let's talk about the other side. The bad side, I guess. The bad side of the exercise is the administration.
Just a minute. Even that, he's investing in something which is an unknown quantity, and he doesn't know if it's going to go or not. He's taking a gamble.
That's right. He's getting 30% insurance, though, that he's only investing 70%. He's only risking 70% of his funds.
Right. Okay.
Okay. The other side of that, then, is that the corporation then is restricted. So if he's the sole owner of that corporation, those funds can't be lent to any corporations in which he may have a related interest. It may not be a relative, it may be a relative of his, and so on.
You're talking about new venture capital corporations.
Right. Again, my understanding is that it's limited. He can only invest in incorporated corporations, small businesses. So again, the 50% of the small business sector is ignored. The proprietors and the partnerships can't take advantage of this unless they incorporate, which of course they can. If they... If at any time they break the rules, and there are many rules, which we weren't given all the rules, but any time they break the rules, the corporation is then suddenly disqualified and they lose their 30% of their funds. So when they get this $200,000 from this gentleman, something like $60,000 goes into a trust account, which is reserved, and the $140,000 stays aside. Now, if they don't invest the money within 18 months, they lose 40% of the $60,000, which is $24,000 the government immediately takes. That's a penalty. It's non-refundable. It's forfeited. If they don't invest the money in 36 months, then they lose 70% of the $60,000, which is $42,000. So there's heavy penalties. At any time that the corporation is disqualified, and it can be catapulted into a disqualified position simply by virtue of something that the small business to whom it lent the money does, it becomes disqualified because it's made it a non-qualifying investment, such as if the funds go to pay a dividend or the funds go to repay some shareholders' advances, whatever the case may be. So it's layered, and that's just the start of the regulations, I understand. We weren't given privy to all of them yesterday. They said they would be tabled later, and they're probably being distributed today.
In other words, you regard that as a bit of a gimmicky, impractical, on the face of it proposition.
Should mention one other, the major difference between it and the other provinces is that in the other provinces, Alberta in particular, it was not restricted. It applied to all small business. In British Columbia, it's restricted to small businesses engaged in manufacturing, processing, tourism, research and development, and aquaculture, which is probably represents, I don't know, I think this will probably be applicable to 10% of the small business in British Columbia.
Now, what about the incentives for new industrial development in municipalities? You're an alderman still, aren't you?
Yes.
Where, Maple Ridge?
Maple Ridge, yes.
Maple Ridge. Where they're going to get tax concessions for setting up a new business.
50% of the value of the improvements on land, the property tax on improvements on land, that section of the tax, not on land.
Now, is this a good thing?
Well, I think it's a good thing. I question the competition end of it. It's rather interesting that they say that the municipalities will be able to give 50% and more of a break in this area. The government will match it with the school tax portion, but only to the 50% level. So if you give over 50%, they're not going to match you with 50. They're going to match you up to the 50. So the rest you're going to go on your own. But I'm a little concerned how that might affect, and I don't know the rules. I imagine the rules will be quite interesting. I mean, we have to protect existing business, so you would not look favorably on giving a tax break to one business which would be competing unfairly with another business. So I think it's going to have to be very carefully applied, and it's a bit worrisome from the competition side.
Now, the little man, the big hit he gets, of course, is in the full application of the full year's health care maintenance surtax. Is that right?
That's right.
Anything else that hits the little man?
Well, all the things in the street. If you're a smoker, you're getting hit with that and all those kind of things. But for the man on the street looking for a job, there's nothing. He shouldn't get excited.
Hang on out. Webster and my panel this morning, Mr. Munro, Mr. Matkin, and Mr. Evancic, on the budget after the break. Well, we have a highly distinguished panel this morning, myself included, Mr. Evancic, Mr. Matkin, Brother Munro, and Jack Webster. We're just taking calls and we'll all pitch in when necessary and answer. Go ahead, please.
Hello?
Yes?
Yeah, I would like to know in what way will our investments, if we want to invest in a small business, in what way will this budget help us if we are going into partnerships of 4 of us?
Okay, partnerships don't apply.
Don't apply.
In other words...
Incorporate and do you no good at all unless somebody forms a venture capital corporation.
See, there's going to be a lot of education to be done on this, is there not?
During the break, Jack, not on that call, but during the break we got a phone call. One immediate reaction is there are between 85 and 100 pulp workers being laid off at Port Alice tonight.
Oh, that's good news, isn't it? Tonight,
Tonight.
Who runs Port Alice?
Western Forest Products.
Western Forest Products. Go ahead, please. Hello.
Hello, Jack.
That's you. Yeah.
Yeah, I was wondering, I'm just a recent graduate from Quality College in the building construction program, eh? And I went from unemployment now to welfare, and I was wondering if there's any hope for me with this budget. You know, they spent $15,000 on my education. I can't get a job now.
What's your qualification?
Well, I've got grade 12, and I've taken a year course at Quality College in a building construction carpentry apprenticeship, eh?
Hold on.
Venture capital corporations can't lend money to a corporation that would hire you.
Oh, it's not even venture. What do you mean venture capital?
The venture capital corporations are restricted from lending to manufacturing. He's in house building, it's not included.
Any hope for him in the budget?
Well, I think the broad question is, does the budget improve the economic climate? Does it stimulate the climate? Will it help forest companies to survive? As Jack said, the forest companies are in very tough shape. They're laying off workers. So from that point of view, if the budget
see, this is an interesting call because he is a young guy, just graduated from UI to welfare after training who says naively the budget helped me, and I've got to say, no, it doesn't help you on the face of it, does it?
But it does in terms of setting the right climate.
Go ahead, please.
As a carpenter, how many carpenters are unemployed? 60% or something.
Yeah, about 5,000.
You know, you feel sorry for young guys like this.
Can't get in. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I can sympathize with the last caller. I'm in the same position he is, and I'll tell you something. Last year, I went to the Federal Business Development Corporation. I wanted to borrow some money. I know enough to start my own little business where I could have hired a minimum of 5 people. And basically what they told me, look, if you want to borrow $150,000, fine. If you want to borrow 25, we can't help you. I'd like to quote one of your earlier guests on the show. This budget is bloody useless. Uncle Bill and the boys have put it together. They're going to snap it on us just before the next election, and then a year down the road say, hey, look, we haven't had the money now, but we have it now. Re-elect us so we can get it done. It's full. 10 years ago when I came into this province, you know, things weren't this expensive. The NDP was in power, and a lot of people were blasting them. Unfortunately, I haven't lived here long enough to be able to comment, but I'll tell you something. It'll be a cold day in hell before Uncle Bill gets another vote from me.
I must encourage you, Jimmy. Go ahead, please. Where are you?
Hello?
That's you.
Oh, yeah. I'd like to address this to Jack Munro. With our raw log products going out of the country, Jack,
right?
And the mill's been, I worked up at Port Alice, by the way, and I've never, it's never been actually explained to me, or maybe I've never heard it, why this is being done where we're
Export of
off.
raw logs, Tunnakey and Munro will go off on that subject. Export of raw logs, why is it being done?
Well, you're right. I could get excited about that. It is another cop-out where we are, once again, exporting our raw natural resources, the finest logs that exist in this province, Jack, and to the caller, the finest logs. Absolutely no manufacturing done to them at all, just on ship, offshore.
And Mr. Matkin would say it's better that than no export at all.
Well, it's a matter of the market. If you don't export, someone else will. And if we don't take some advantage of that market, then we're just losing jobs in British Columbia.
Japanese have told us since they bought the first stick of wood, we don't want to buy any lumber off you, we want to buy logs. But we said, no, you can't, so they had to buy lumber. Now we've said, well, we'll sell you logs. Because Weyerhaeuser in the United States is selling logs off of private lands. Speaking of Weyerhaeuser in the United States, that guest you had on yesterday hasn't got a clue what the hell is going on in this forest industry up here.
McKillop, yeah.
McKillop, he doesn't know anything about it. Even the minister admits that the forest is a mess in this province. And so people who listened to him yesterday saying things aren't so bad in the forest in BC shouldn't pay much attention to it.
Delete Professor McKillop from the University of Southern California from your mind retention banks instantly.
Right.
Says Munro.
The forests are a mess.
Go ahead, please.
I have a question regarding the UIC health surcharge tax. I am on a UIC claim, and when my claim started, they informed me that it would be 8% less. It should have been 112 a week, but it was 104 because of the health surcharge tax. I'm wondering how this doubling of the tax will affect me, whether I'll lose another 8% on my...
No, you'll lose another 4%. You'll lose another... The amount that has been deducted will be doubled for the full year we're coming up to.
That's right.
That's right. It will be doubled. The deduction will be doubled to cover the tax. Go ahead, please.
Yes, hello there, Jack, and Mr. Munro.
Good morning.
Yes, I'm a former graduate of BCIT Forest Resource Technology, and I was thinking, seeing as we're exporting so many damn raw logs these days, I decided I'd go out and get myself a licensed scaler's ticket.
Right.
The chances of getting a job, you figure, with all these raw logs being shipped out.
Well, if you can afford to go and get a ticket, it doesn't hurt to have another ticket. But the forest industry will recover. It's not the twilight industry. It's going to come back. Sure, get a ticket.
Get a ticket. Go ahead, please. Hello.
Oh, good morning.
Morning.
I have 2 or 3 comments, nothing questionable, but comments. Number one, I have been around and involved in the forest industry for the last 10 to 15 years in some way or shape or form. I have nothing but disrespect, if you're not so much disrespect, but disappointment for Mr. Munro and the forest industry in itself and the manner in which they are dealing with budgetary issues, the wages, and everything else. If there's one resource in this province that's brought us down, along with the government's intervention and the government's lack of intervention, is the forest industry, number one.
Well, that's a kind of broad statement.
Sorry?
That's a broad statement.
And rest of the country has got how many natural resources within their province?
Lots.
We've got forestry, we've got mining, we've got fisheries, we've got tourism. We're sitting on a gravy train, and yet we, the people of British Columbia, are so wrapped up in ourselves we cannot put it into any type of direction. And I blame partly that to Mr. Munro and the forest industry.
Why lump me in with the forest industry? I speak out because there is not a spokesman in this province for the forest industry. Not one.
Mr. Munro, you can also appreciate that there's a common element here, and that is the fact that you have, and this is not directed personally at you, but there's, you have to look at the common elements that's been going on for the last 10 years that's brought this province to where it is.
Well, I'm getting fed up with that call. It's not getting anywhere. Go ahead, please.
Oh, one thing I would like to know is that in recent years there's been many cutbacks in the Ministry of Human Resources. Is there anything in the budget that would suggest that there may be more cutbacks in the Ministry of Human Resources?
Yes, there is. There's a budgetary cut to seniors of $1 million, to health and dental on welfare pays for $1.7 million, some cutback on aid to retarded for $6 million, job training cut $4 million, and children's aid $2 million. After the break. Well, I hope this doesn't deteriorate into a bunch of oddball questions, because what we were trying to assess was the budget. We had no point in talking to Mr. Munro about it. We know it's a disaster and all the rest of it. But then, of course, you're politically biased anyway. Even if they brought down a good budget, you wouldn't say it was a good job, would you?
Try me. Jack, it shouldn't be me that's here. It should be the forest industry sitting here telling you what a disaster it is. But the forest industry are afraid of this government. Can you imagine the largest industry in this country who brings in more money to Canada in export dollars than agriculture and oil and auto and all the rest of this jazz is afraid of these characters in Victoria?
Do you think he's right on that?
No, I don't. I think.
Do you think big business
No.
is so tender-footed that they don't want to speak out against the government?
Look, the business is trying to be consistent. They spoke out. Ray Smith spoke out loudly and clearly, and we've spoken out, saying we wanted some tax changes.
You got it.
And we got them. So now what does he want us to do? In fact, Jack, what you're really saying is they didn't go far enough. They went in the right direction. You're saying what business asked for is what should happen.
I read
but it should have gone
Smith
further.
In the paper talking about that $40 per ton water tax, saying it was a disaster, that it was driving people out of this province, like Ray Smith and M&B, and that tax is not changed, except that it's frozen. It's still there.
He also
it's
talked about
and in this morning's paper, Ray Smith, well, the government has obviously been listening. They froze the tax that he said was driving them bankrupt.
And they reduced the $8 a ton tax on property and machinery and equipment. They didn't. Business recognizes that we didn't get it all. Where do you want us to take some more from?
That there are people in this province. Somebody has got to recognize that there are some people in this province. When an unemployed guy, person, woman or man, goes looking for a job, driving around here, and it costs $40 to fill up their gas tank, more than $20 of that is in government taxes.
Well, that's a good point.
More than $20.
One of the most important changes they made was to reduce the fuel tax from 20% to 7%.
Off-road.
Off-road. Off-road.
That's for farmers and workers and logging trucks.
But when a guy gets in his car to go from here to there, to look for a job, he pays the full tax.
Sure, but the small business guy.
More than 50%.
I'm
talking about unemployed members of ours.
More than anybody else, you know that if a company can't sell its products abroad for whatever reason, it goes bankrupt and you're out of work.
Jack, there is lots of things we could do in this province with some help.
Fair enough. Do you want to get in on this, Barney?
Well, all I can say is that we are subject to the outside economy. You know, the way the world looks at the products we have to export have a direct impact on what we can get for them, and currently they're not looking on our products very kindly. You know, the price is a third of what it was several years ago, so that's a difficult problem.
That's somebody talking to you. Go ahead, please.
I just like to ask you why we don't have our own IKEA.
What's IKEA?
IKEA furniture.
Furniture store.
No, look, furniture. We make our own.
Why don't we manufacture?
Oh, why don't we
I can
manufacture
respond to
furniture?
that.
Can you respond to
I
that?
can respond to that. We're currently trying to establish a particle board factory in Maple Ridge to do just that, madam, and wish us luck. We're trying very hard to have it established.
And you might get some help from the provincial government on this.
Yes, indeed, we hope
There's
we will.
something else, Jack. Particle boards. This wafer board, this new board that's displacing plywood.
Oh, the one that went south.
Right. There's over 40 of those plants being built. Not one in British Columbia.
Wasn't invented here.
Started.
And where are they being built?
Just below the border.
Cheaper wages? Less taxes?
Better taxes.
Better taxes?
Wages, Jack. We're putting wood from Prince George into the Deep South cheaper than what they're manufacturing wood in the Deep South at $5 an hour from trees that grow in 25 years.
That's a good answer.
Our productivity factor can't be touched.
But if you were starting a business today, you'd start it south of the... I mean, I'm not talking about you personally. Better to start it south of the border than north of the border.
Well, there are certainly incentives that cause people to start businesses in other locations in Canada, even.
Well, isn't that what Curtis is
but I
trying
think you
to
have
do
to know
now?
all the aspects, yes, and he's improving the climate. I think we have to give him points, 10 points for that.
Go ahead, please.
Out of a million.
Morning.
Yeah.
Good morning. I have a question I'm sure that many people in British Columbia are asking this morning. How, to anyone in the panel, how will any of the so-called business incentives translate as benefits to the consumer or benefits to the man in the street, the unemployed, etc.?
They won't.
Well, let me answer that question in this way. That on this point, I agree with Jack that the primary industries, forestry and mining, are our enduring economy. And therefore, by addressing these tax changes in this budget, largely to the forestry and mining concerns, which were raised with Mr. Curtis, they are going to keep alive the goose that's laying the golden egg for British Columbia. So if you're a consumer, you're going to be able to continue to consume because our enduring industries are surviving. That's the hope. That's the ambition of this kind of budget that we've asked for from
I think that should be clarified a little more. The hope is that the private sector, with the initiatives they have now, will be able to carry it away and create the jobs, because there was no direct job creation in this budget.
And you say it's nonsense.
Nonsense.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, good morning. I'd like to give a citation to the present government for tackling the problem, taking hold of the situation and doing something with it. It's Jack Munro's and the labor climate in BC, and we're very narrow. We seem to forget to look over those borders and look further across the country, i.e. the restaurant business, the difference in bartender salary, etc. I think it comes right into the labor problem. And the human resource things and stuff have come out of all that. We can have all those big things, high salaries, etc. But I don't think there's too many of us want to pay the 75-80% taxes it would cost us out of our salary. And a big citation for the present government.
Pat in the back for social credit.
What kind of nonsense is that?
He's entitled to pat them in the back.
Well, what the
He
hell?
wants to see your
they
wages
flip our
cut.
wages around. They can't touch us in productivity.
You mean you... if the employers would modernize the mills as you say they should have done.
Right.
Go ahead, please.
Morning, Mr. Webster.
Morning.
The present budget is something obviously that everyone is affected by, but I just think that we should, rather than looking to a negative point of view, take something positive out of this, and I don't see that there's any positive other than this tax benefit for small businesses.
And
I was
I'll
wondering...
have to leave it there. You're wondering what?
I was wondering if anyone can take a Jimmy Pattison approach to the budget and the government, and that is basically, let's just leave it the way it is, do the best we can, try to trim down the government, get these people out if we can. If not, let's just deal with it and do the best we can, put our nose to the grindstone as British Columbians and Canadians, and get back with it, irrespective of high labor rates and everything else.
Well, that was quite a good, hopeful, positive sum up with which all of us agree.
Right.
Right.
Right?
It's hope and pray.
My thanks to Roman Evancic. My thanks to Jimmy Matkin. And my thanks to Brother Munro.
Be nice, Jack.
Be as nice as I can. Thank you, gentlemen. I think it's been an illuminating performance this morning. I'll be back with a very special bulletin about sexual sabotage after the break. The most embarrassed cabinet minister in Canada today is the Honourable Tom McMillan, who's the federal Ottawa Minister of Tourism. He spent a fortune in putting out a booklet called Tourism Tomorrow Towards a Canadian Tourism Strategy, and somebody has committed sexual sabotage in the drawings in the booklet. I can't give you a detailed glance at it, or you'd accuse me of selling dirty magazines. But just give me the isolated, cleaned-up version of it. Not once, but twice in the book, there are clear, rude, silly, kind of dirty things in the Towards a Canadian Tourism Strategy. Every copy is being recalled, except this one, which I shall keep as a souvenir of Macmillan's gross embarrassment. Had to tell you that. Now, SFU this weekend, there's going to be open house. March that 16th and 17th is Saturday and Sunday. From 10 to 4, Saturday, 10 to 4 Sunday. There's lots going on. And in view of the fact that I got a doctorate there, can you see that? They're sending me a T-shirt. Monday, we're going to tackle many things, starting Monday morning with Mike Harcourt, the Mayor of the City of Vancouver, at 9 a.m. precisely.
It's a very affecting story. Yes.
You recommend you buy?
Well, I'm an admirer of modern fiction.
Do you recommend you buy his book?
Well, I think again that I recommend him for his imagination.
Suppose I ask you to think about the last moment you were angry, or do I dare an erotic moment?
Let's not get into that.
That sort of thing.
I'm over it now.
I didn't know that wrestling was still going on. I'm afraid it's not one of my areas of interest since Gorgeous George died.
Do admit that her powers are real.
Thank you very much. Your call makes no sense to me whatso blinking ever.